Okay, I'm guessing that we are live. So, you've got Mel with Tim Kelley. How are you, Tim?
I'm good. How are you, Mel?
Very well. So, the show starts with our jingle.
All right, play the jingle.
I'm going to play the jingle. It's like part of the thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Get ready.
Get a chair, grab a seat, or we'll sweep you off your feet. We move, we groove, you got Mel. Ease your legs, rest a while, all you gotta do is smile. We're swell, can't you tell, you got Mel. When the show begins, you better hold on real tight, or before you know it, you'll be high as a kite. Take a break, settle down, we're the only show in town. SRO, don't you know, you got Mel. Give it up, don't think twice, we're a hurricane on ice. What the hell, give a yell, ring your bell, show and tell. Mademoiselle, give a smell, you got Mel.
You've got Mel. And Mel has Tim Kelley. Hi,
Hmm.
Tim.
Hi, Mel. Good singing voice.
Well, thank you very much, my friend. You're going to sing at the end of the show, so I'm preparing you now in advance.
All right, good. Thanks for the warning.
So, Tim, you're one of my favorite people in North America, and you've been suffering.
I've been what? You're a little faint.
I'm a little faint. You've been suffering.
We have been suffering here. It's true. It's it's been rough on a couple fronts. One is all the fires. I'm in California, so there's a lot of fires and a lot of smoke. So instead of checking the weather before we go outside, we check to see what the air quality index looks like before we go outside. And so we wear masks for two reasons, right? We got our masks for COVID and all our masks to screen all the stuff out of the air so we can breathe.
It's
So
too.
there's
It's too
that, and then there's the politics, right? That's the other freak show going on.
it's too bad that your air doesn't kill the virus.
That would be really convenient, but it
Not,
doesn't
it
seem
doesn't
to.
kill the virus.
I like that.
You can use it. So Tim, start. We have a couple of topics to talk about.
Hmm.
We want to talk about politics without naming names.
Hmm.
You've given a how do you pronounce prescient?
Yes, prescient. Very good.
Prescient talk at TEDx Shankar College 2 years ago, and
Hmm.
I'm going to post it right underneath the Facebook because you talk about the infantile behavior of politicians, and this week we just had a perfect example
Perfect example.
without naming names. But and we want to talk about your P word. Everybody
Hmm.
else uses the P word of passion, and you
Hmm.
have another P word, so we want to talk about that. But
Hmm.
first, tell our audience a little bit about the incredible Tim Kelley.
Well, I'll tell you about myself. I'll leave it to you to decide whether I'm incredible or not.
I already wrote it. Just
Yeah, so I was born in Tokyo, Japan. Grew up in New York City. I was the son of a minister and a nurse, and was a techno guy. Went to MIT, got a degree in math. Went to work at Oracle Corporation. Worked in Silicon Valley for many years. And out of my own desire to have a more meaningful and fulfilling life, went in search of my purpose and eventually found it. And out of that, wrote a book called True Purpose and created a whole system, a whole methodology for finding the purpose of people and companies and countries, which is
there's
now
isn't there
taught
some
all over the world. What's that?
Navy in your biography?
Yeah, I spent 23 years in the Navy. I've had
Right.
three careers at this point.
Hey,
So,
Tim, you were in the army for 23 years. Okay, but and what kind of childhood did you have?
I grew up in New York City, sort of roaming the streets of the city with my friends. And I don't know, it was a relatively uneventful childhood, I think. Went on vacations, had a dog, went to school, got good grades, that sort of thing. It was, had the occasional girlfriend. There was nothing looking back on it that seems remarkable about my childhood. Of course, I have my own, highs and lows and interpretations and stuff of it, but nothing that would make for a great movie or anything. So,
Hmm. So let's move on to the P word. Everybody talks about passion, and you talk about purpose. So
I do.
Run us through that.
Well, I can tell you why I talk about purpose rather than passion. They're related. There's a correlation to be sure. And there's another P word, pleasure, right? There's various different P words. They're all sort of somewhat connected. So let's take as the premise, Mel, and this is demonstrably false, but we're going to pretend it's true, that everyone's trying to have a happy life. Okay, let's just put that out there as an assumption. Okay, so if you're trying to have a happy life, that raises the question, okay, what do I need to do in order to be happy? That would be a fairly, you hear the mathematician, that'd be a fairly logical thing to do. If you're trying to have a happy life, you would try to do things and engage in things and be in situations and in places that make you happy. Well, that raises an interesting question: well, what makes you happy? And what is happiness exactly? Right? Because if you're going to maximize your happiness, you have to understand how it works. And it turns out there's not really one kind of happiness. There's multiple types of happiness. So pleasure would be one form of happiness. Passion would be another form of happiness. Excitement would be another form of happiness. Joy would be another form of happiness. Fulfillment would be another form of happiness. Thrills could create a sense of happiness, right? And pleasure has multiple forms. It could be pleasure from listening to beautiful music, could be pleasure from eating great food, pleasure from having great sex, or taking good drugs. There's different types of pleasure, right? So the people
or speaking to an incredible friend.
Or speaking to an incredible friend, that could create a pleasure. So the people who've studied happiness study, well, what happens when you do these various things? And it turns out that a bunch of these things, the excitement, the thrills, the pleasure, create short-lived versions of happiness. And like a drug, you need bigger fixes. If you're going to go for excitement, right, if you do the same thing several times, eventually it'll stop being as exciting and you need a bigger fix, or you need something different, right? And so pleasure and excitement, and even to some degree passion, depending on how you define it, tend not to be sustained forms of happiness, and can have negative side effects, right? If you're like, hedonism, where you're constantly seeking pleasure, has all sorts of interesting negative side effects. But meaning and fulfillment create much longer lasting happiness than pleasure and excitement do. And it depends on what you mean by passion, right? If you mean I'm passionate about my job, that's great. If you mean I'm passionate about this sandwich, that's going to be fairly short-lived. Right. So it depends on
about my job, but I got fired. So
yeah. And then now you have to find something else to be passionate about, right? So if you're feeling passionate about a sustained thing that gives you a sense of meaning and fulfillment, that's great. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't seek pleasure. Absolutely, you should. But if you're relying on pleasure exclusively as your source of happiness, then you're headed for trouble, headed for dark times. But if you rely on meaning and fulfillment for happiness, it does a couple different things. One is meaning and fulfillment last longer, right? So you don't get these little spikes of pleasure like that. You get a much more sustained experience of happiness. That's one. And the other is it's much better for you. People who experience meaning and fulfillment in their lives, and one of the easiest ways to do this, ironically, is to feel meaning and fulfillment at work. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't feel meaning and fulfillment in their work. But if you do, that creates a general experience of meaning and fulfillment in life. In fact, it's difficult to have an experience of a meaningful and fulfilled life without meaningful and fulfilling work. It's hard to do. It can be done, but it's much harder.
Tim, this is all without the necessity of believing in God.
Oh, absolutely. Right. I'm talking about my experience of my life and whether my life is useful and has meaning, and whether it's going to matter that I lived or not. That's what we're talking about. None of that is dependent on religion or any particular belief system. That's an experience.
We had a discussion at the airport where you hadn't slept for 3 days, and I hadn't slept much either. And trying to explain to me that people have to seek the purpose. It's not always self-evident.
Oh, it's almost never self-evident. Very rarely. I mean, there's a very small percentage of people. Well, give me a second. Let me work. I haven't used that P word yet. Let me work my way around to it. Let's say that you agree with me that, yes, I want to have a meaning and fulfilling life. Then the question is, great, how do I do that? What do I need to do? What is that work? What is that project? What is that thing that if I do it over a long period of time is going to give me a sense of meaning and fulfillment? Because that's going to make you live longer. It's going to make you more resistant to disease, more resistant to dementia. You're going to earn more money. There's a whole bunch of things that happen when you're living that way. So if you accept all of that, what I would say is purpose is a strategy for creating a meaningful, fulfilling life. You don't necessarily, there are people who are living very meaningful, fulfilling lives and have no idea what their purpose is. It's not a prerequisite. But if you don't know how to live a meaningful and fulfilling life, and you're trying to increase the amount of meaning and fulfillment in your life, then finding your purpose is a great technique for doing that. Because once you know your purpose, then you can go, oh, I see, if this is my purpose, then I should do this or this or this or this to get meaning and fulfillment. Then you can do it or not, but at least then you know what the options are. You know what will create meaning and fulfillment for you, as opposed to it being trial and error, which is how most people do it.
So the purpose is a strategy?
The purpose is a strategy. The purpose is a strategy for meeting high-level Maslow's hierarchy needs. It's a technique. It's not an end in and of itself. And a lot of people would disagree with me on that. A lot of people who talk about purpose, like purpose is the ultimate goal. I'm like, no, it's not. Purpose is a strategy. It's a strategy for creating meaning and fulfillment. Because the goal is to have a certain type of life, and the purpose is a tool for creating it.
So, Tim, two things. First of all, I know that this is how you make a living, but
it is.
Maybe you want to share one or two tidbits for our audience here.
Be more specific. I have days worth of tidbits. What kind of tidbit would you like, Mel?
Take one that people give you $5,000 to explain, and just give it to us for free. How about that?
Well, let me model a few things here, right? Let's imagine that this were a purpose finding session, and you had just hired me and paid me $10,000. I generally don't do it for $5,000.
Give me a discount.
You said, Tim, find my purpose. I want a meaningful, fulfilling life.
Yeah.
The first question I would ask you, Mel, and I want you to answer as yourself, is let's assume that such a thing, there's a very small number of people who disbelieve that there is such a thing as a purpose, right? It's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the population. Most people accept the concept, right? Oh, sure, that makes sense, right? Why am I here? Okay, that's a question. Could have an answer, maybe, right? So do you believe that you have a purpose? Let's assume for the moment that you don't know what yours is, okay? Do you believe it's already there and you have to find it? That's your job? Or can you make up any purpose you like, and the fact that you said that that's your purpose makes it your purpose? And this is not a right or wrong question. I'm just curious what you believe, Mel.
I think that they're both analogous. Because
there are people who believe that both are true. They believe that there is a purpose, but you still have to choose it, right?
Yeah,
is it something like that?
There's several things that I believe in doing in my life.
I'm not asking about what you're doing. The purpose is deeper than that. Purpose can express through different activities.
I know. I do believe that there is a purpose.
Okay, you believe there is one. All right. And then it expresses through various meaningful activities. Okay, good. Now, the reason I bring that up, Mel, is not everyone believes the purpose is already there. There are some people who treat it like a goal or a value where, if I say my goal is to, earn 1 billion shekels or whatever, the fact that I said that makes it my goal. And before I decided that was my goal, it wasn't, right? I mean, that's how goals work.
I mean, if
I set a goal. Some people believe that you set a purpose in exactly the same way.
No. So if you set a goal and you believe that that's your goal, then that could be your goal.
Well, it is now because I decided that it was, right? I mean, I have the ability to set goals for myself.
Yeah.
If I don't set any goals, I don't have any, and if I set goals, I do.
Some people set goals, but they deceive themselves.
Sure, maybe I do a bad job of pursuing that goal, or I lie to myself. That's not the point. The point is that my goals are completely my choice, right? I might want something, but until I set a goal, I don't have one.
I'm with you.
Okay, good. Some people believe that purpose works exactly the same way. Until I decide and choose a purpose, I don't have one. It's a small fraction of the population, less than 50%, not tiny, but it's less than 50%, maybe like 10, 20, 30, something like that. It varies from country to country, how many. But most people believe the purpose is there and they're seeking it, right? And so if you're in one of those two situations, the task is different, right? If you believe that you can choose any purpose you like, the task is to choose a good one. If you believe the purpose is already there, the task is to find it, right? So if the purpose is already there and the task is to find it, then the question is, where do I look? And people have no clue. And so they can go years without being able to answer the question, decades in some cases. I did. So I think it was like 25 years or something. It was a lot. So
your purpose is, can you explain it?
Sure. Sure. I would say that it's to guide leaders to create heaven on earth. That's my purpose.
It's a bit ephemeral, you know.
I don't know. If you're a leader who's called to create heaven on earth, it's not ephemeral at all.
You have to define heaven, though.
Yes, I would encourage you to do that if you were such a leader. That would be part of the project, right? No, it's actually quite tactical and practical, and it takes several years to do. And it involves totally, you know, if you were such a leader, it would involve completely reformatting your ego so that you would be a new paradigm leader who could go out and create a better world, right? That's the game. That's my purpose. Now, yours is going to be something different and someone else is going to be something different, right? So how did I find that? Well, I didn't make it up. I didn't choose it. I didn't just wait for it to show up. I went looking for it. And the place to look for your purpose is in the unconscious. Because if it's true about you, if you have a purpose and you don't know what it is, by definition, it's unconscious. That's what unconscious means. It means it's true about you and you don't know it. That's your unconscious. So rather than go out in the world doing trial and error or asking other people or wondering for years, which are very inefficient processes, the efficient way to go about it is to probe into your own unconscious to get the answer, to get it from the unconscious and move it to the conscious. So now you know what it is. That's the game. That's how I do it, right? And the problem with that is probing in the unconscious is tricky. It's unconscious, right? How do you get down in there? How do you do that? That's what I wrote the book True Purpose about. That's what the True Purpose methodology is about. That's what I train coaches and therapists and consultants all around the world to do, is how to probe into your unconscious to find that specific piece of information called your purpose.
So it's not too late for somebody like me.
Oh, no. I've worked with folks much older than you, Mel.
And you know, you've given me a lovely present, your autographed book, which I've read, but if I read it 5 more times, will that be enough, or do I have to?
No, you have to do the exercises. Only have to read it once, but you have to do the exercises.
So Tim,
10, Mel. I'm not giving you a discount.
I said 10.
Okay, I thought you said 5. All right.
I might even give you 11 with the tip. So here's the next thing. But you argued with me that you also train leaders.
Yes.
To look for purposes in businesses.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Financial companies. I mean,
yeah.
How crazy is that?
Not crazy at all. If you look at the statistics, Mel, organizations that have a higher purpose and are actually doing something with it are way more financially successful than ones that are not.
Amazon has a purpose?
Yeah, they do. And so does Google. So here's the thing. The classic economic view, this is Milton Friedman and Chicago School of Economics, says the purpose of business is to generate value for shareholders, period. And that's an amoral activity, right? The business doesn't need to worry about its impact. The invisible hand of the market will sort all that stuff out. All you have to do is focus on generating as much profit as possible. That's it. And everything else will be fine, right? That's the theory, Okay. Now, they treat it like it's a law of physics, but it's economics. It's not physics. There's people involved, which makes it much messier. Well, it turns out that if I'm the owner of the company and you're the employee and you're coming to work every day, and I say, oh, that's great that you're coming to work every day to make me rich, I'm really grateful. And assume you didn't know me that well, right? We're buddies. You might work harder for me. But if I were some stranger who happened to own this company, are you going to rush to work early to make me richer, even though you're not going to be paid more? Probably not. Not if you don't personally care about me as a person, right?
I will leave and become a university professor.
Exactly, right? So here's the, and same thing if you're a customer, right? Do you want to pay more for the product in order to make me richer? Not so much, okay? The problem is if the purpose of the business is just to make money for somebody else, nobody really cares if it succeeds or fails. But on the other hand, what if my company was curing some disease or solving climate change or feeding starving children or saving whales or something like that? As long as Amazon
doesn't do any of the above.
Oh, no, they do not. They do not. You asked if they had a purpose. Technically, the answer to that is yes, but
okay. No, because I said okay.
No. But here's the thing. So a lot of people who use Facebook or use Amazon, a lot of people who use Facebook or use Amazon don't like the company, right? Same thing with Walmart. They don't like the company. They kind of hold their nose and shop there or hold their nose and work there, right? Different, say, Patagonia, for example, right? Where people love to buy their products. So I interviewed the head of Patagonia China recently, and we were talking about this. And I said, well, give me an example of a time when you've made a decision as a company, Patagonia, that was financially inconvenient in favor of the purpose. That's how you tell if a company is serious about their purpose. If they can cite examples of when they deliberately and specifically and intentionally took an economic hit for the purpose, right? And he said, oh, I've got a great example, Tim. He said, did you know that 1/6 of the pesticides in the US are used on cotton only? I said, no, I did not know that, Roger. That is news to me. And he said, well, it was news to us too. And when we, Patagonia, found out that there was massive amounts of pesticides being used on cotton, someone pointed this out to us and said, you're selling cotton t-shirts. Do you have any idea how much pesticides are? And their purpose is all about like the environment and nature and stuff like this, right? So they're like, okay, we have to switch to organic cotton. And the financial people said, no, it's going to make the t-shirts cost 4 times as much. You can't do it. And they said, no, you don't understand. We have to do it. So they switched to organic cotton, quadrupled the cost of their t-shirts, and their t-shirt sales, revenues, went up 60% that year. Why? Because their customers wanted to support them in doing the right thing. They preferred the organic t-shirt. That's why, right? And this is something that the classical economists just can't figure out. It's like people, if it's a company that's really trying to do the right thing, the employees and the customers want it to succeed and will help. They will get out and push when things get rough. And for a company that's just trying to make money, they will let it fail and move on. And that is a huge economic advantage for the purposeful company. Enormous.
Okay, how does this mesh with Simon Sinek and his TED Talk about the why?
Yeah, that's exactly the same thing. When he says you have to know your why, he's just saying it in other words. You have to know your purpose would be a perfect synonym for that. And he would agree because he's got a whole bunch of people he's trained to go find the purpose of companies, right? It's exactly it.
He's one of your competitors.
No, not at all. He's doing marketing for me. I really appreciate it. Well, because he does all these talks and all this stuff about how important it is to find your purpose and gives almost no guidance whatsoever on how to do it. So I'm
exactly.
Like, well, thank you, Simon. I appreciate it.
Like Simon says, Tim does.
Yeah. In fairness, I'm sure they're finding people's purposes and stuff like that. And I'm sure they're charging a lot of money for it and whatever. And, God bless them. There's a lot of companies out there that need to find their purpose, and going to take all of us to make it happen.
You also work with politicians, and here
I do.
I'm afraid to say that in the greater world order, you're not working with the right politicians, Tim.
I'm not? Why do you say that?
Well,
you don't know which politicians I'm working with. Why would you say that?
Well, because the ones that I see on TV have no purpose that I can see except being obnoxious. And you gave a talk.
No. Their purpose is not to be obnoxious, not at all. Neither yours nor mine is that their purpose. They're trying to do something else. Being obnoxious is a side effect.
So what's wrong with politics? You gave a whole talk.
I did. Well, there's a couple things. So one is that it's fundamentally, I would say psychologically, that it's a deeply wounded institution. And we should have great sympathy for the people who go into politics to try to make it better, which is most politicians. People have a horrifyingly negative view of politicians, and with good reason. I'm not saying there's not evidence for that. But understand that the vast majority of people who get into politics do it in order to make a positive difference. That is their conscious motive. They also have some unconscious motives, we all do. But they get into politics because they want to fix the system and they want to make it better, right? And that fish that lives deep in the ocean that has a little light and like leads something right into its mouth. I think it's called an anglerfish or something like that. I can't remember. Anyway, it's basically like that. So people who want to make a difference and want to make the system better are food for the political system. They get eaten, they get chewed up and digested and turned into politicians, right? And then we get what we see. Right. But they didn't start out that way. They started out authentically, genuinely wanting to make a difference, with very rare exceptions. I have an exception in my country. I don't think you do in yours, Mel. I think your nameless politician really did. Actually, I have it on firsthand evidence that that's true. I have known and worked with two of his campaign managers who assure me that that is the case.
I'm still going to be very skeptical.
Now, I'm not saying that's what's going on now. I'm talking about why he started. Right? Why he began, right? Now, my wife recently shared some fascinating research with me, and I'm really happy we get to talk about this, Mel.
About your
which
wife?
Is that, what's that?
Talk about your wife?
No, I mean, I'd love to talk about my wife, but that's not germane. It's the research, the research I want to talk about. She sent me this article in the Atlantic magazine about how power causes brain damage. And here's how it works. Normal human beings like you and me are trying to get our needs met. That's one of our kind of ongoing projects. Back to that happiness thing at the beginning, right? We're going around through life and we're interested in getting certain stuff to happen a certain way because it's going to make things better for us, right? We want to get paid for our work. We want our primary relationship partner to be happy. We want our kids to go to a good school. There's all sorts of things we're trying to make happen. We want to make sure there's food on the table. All this stuff that we're trying to make happen because it will result in us being happier and having a better life, right? So we're trying to get all these needs met. And most psychologically healthy adults are fairly good at that, right? And we're just doing stuff all the time to manage all of that, right? And then there's problems that pop up that we deal with. In order to do that, you have to interact with a lot of other people. And you have to like deal with them in such a way that they're actually going to do at least some of what you want them to do, right? You want the bureaucrat at the Department of Motor Vehicles to renew your license. You want the tax person not to audit you. You want the policeman to, not give you a ticket. You want your wife not to divorce you. There's all this stuff we're trying to interact and negotiate to get stuff to work out well. And, if we're psychologically healthy, we're trying to get it to work out for most of them well too. Right?
How does this cause brain damage?
This doesn't. But now let's say you're a prime minister or a president or a CEO of some huge multinational publicly traded company, right? Or a Russian oligarch or something like that. Someone who's got either a lot of power or a lot of money or both. You with me? Now, Your day looks different. You're surrounded by people whose full-time job is to make you happy. And you do not have to make them happy. If they're unhappy, they're not going to tell you about it. They're going to go home and tell their spouse about it, but they're not going to tell you. And they're going to keep trying to make you happy, even if they're unhappy. If they get really unhappy, they'll leave and someone else will leap into their spot, eager to make you happy. So you don't actually have to deal with the impact of your behavior and the emotions it creates in other people. So there's a whole section of the brain that's devoted to this. They're called mirror neurons. Mm-hmm. It's the neurons I use to figure out what you're probably feeling. Mm-hmm. And we use this two ways, right? One is we're having an interaction and I'm, even if I'm not thinking about it, I'm unconsciously tracking your facial expression and your voice tone and your body language and all this kind of stuff to ask myself, is Mel happy? Is he doing okay? And are we okay? Right? If you're really pissed at me, I need to know about that so I can do something about that, right? That's one way you use them. The other way is to say, well, if I say this or do this, how is Mel likely to feel? And how is he likely to respond? To predict the other person's behavior, right? Mm-hmm. But if your full-time job is to make me happy no matter how I behave, I don't need to exercise that part of my brain. And it starts to atrophy. And this is why our leaders don't exhibit empathy. They do it first. But if you leave them in the power position long enough, eventually this part of their brain will atrophy and they will lose the capacity to correctly assess how someone else will feel based on a behavior that they're doing. This is the brain damage.
Could I also infer that it's like the dopamine rush that you talked about earlier, mm-hmm. that, you work less and less for it?
The dopamine rush that comes from the relationship, yes. Mm-hmm.
Because it's there.
Right.
And then over time, you take people less and less for granted. The very mm-hmm. fact that you're my friend makes me happy.
Yeah.
But if I take it for granted,
mm-hmm. then you don't get the jujus. You don't get the buzz. Mm-hmm. That's right. And so as someone who's really powerful, you are trained to take everyone around you for granted. That's how it works. And it's bad for your brain. Now, it's certainly bad for everyone else. Is it the effect of your decisions after you've lost your empathy? Right? Now, to again, not name names, if you had narcissistic personality disorder or were a sociopath, or as some folks have recently conjectured, a psychopath, then this part of your brain isn't working to begin with. And leaving yourself in a position of power won't change your behavior. And it's been interesting to see how certain people's behavior has not changed after being in office for a certain number of years, which is actually quite rare. Most people behave one way while they're running for office and then a different way when they're in office, right? The weight of the office causes them to think differently. And if they stay in the office long enough, these brain effects start to kick in and their behavior changes more, right? Your guy has changed. My guy has not. But your guy's empathy stuff was working when he went into office. Mine was not.
That's what his strategists have told you.
This is what hundreds of therapists have said.
Yeah, without naming names, of course.
Without naming names, of course.
I would probably take issue with that, but and so before we get to the finale where you're going to sing a Beatles song, mm-hmm. I'm telling you this now so you can get the dopamine going.
Yeah. No guarantees, by the way. We'll see whether I feel like it or not. But continue. You're welcome to try to enroll or force me. Go ahead.
You are a dear human being who loves Israel, who loves mm-hmm. Israelis, obnoxious as we are, mm-hmm. Virus laden as we are.
Yep. Well, you're no more virus laden than we are, sir. We're in a competition to see who can have a worse virus experience, and so far we're winning. We're number one.
Well, you're winning in the mortality region, but yeah. We're catching up. We're catching up.
Yeah, I know. You guys don't want to be left behind. You had it under control, but You can't make me wear a mask. I love that, right? The government can't control me. You can't make me wear a mask and not infect my family members and relatives and neighbors.
My professors.
Yeah.
Beware of students not wearing masks. So what's this love of Israel business?
Well, so it's purposeful for me, Mel. Like I gauge a lot of things off of purpose, and I have it on good authority from my own unconscious that Israel is the light to the world, the light to the goyim. That Israel is meant to fix the world, to Kun Olam, right? That Israel is the key to creating heaven on earth. And I know you guys have all kinds of feelings about that and stories about that, and like that's uncomfortable for many Israelis to say. How arrogant to say, right? Ola Gorim and all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, it does sound arrogant, but good purpose statements do, Mel. So, yeah, the rest of the world's like really frustrated with you guys for not doing your part and Tikkun Olam and fixing the world. We're waiting, right? It's pretty messed up. We need your help. And consciously and unconsciously, everyone knows, and we out here, the Goyim, know it's your job. So I'd love to help Israel do a better job of that. Israel itself is a leader that's meant to change the world. And it needs a little work before it can do that, right? You guys are not positioned perfectly to do that right now. There are some issues.
Tim, people are going to listen to this and they're going to say, "Oh, you're evangelical." This is from a belief in God and Jesus and Armageddon.
No. I'm not into that whole Armageddon thing. So yeah. No, I understand. There's a whole group of folks in the U.S. who are evangelical Christians who believe that the temple has to be rebuilt so that the second coming and yada yada and the Antichrist and all this kind of stuff. It's a great narrative. I mean, there've been some wonderful movies made out of it.
It's a great story, unless you're a Jew.
Yeah. But I don't subscribe to all of that stuff. I'm not trying to precipitate the end of days.
But Tim, if you say that Israel is Orla Goyim and Tikkun Olam,
mm-hmm.
then where does this come from if it doesn't come from God?
Well, it depends on what you believe, right? If you believe in God, then it did come from God, right?
But if you don't.
But if you don't believe in God, then it could still be an accurate purpose statement.
Okay.
It could be that people. So let's say I had this couple once who was doing purpose work, and she was really spiritual, and he was absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
So she's using God as her source for her purpose, and he's definitely not, right? And they're like a little confused about how to relate to this. And I said, "Oh, it's easy." And I turned to her and I said, "This guy thinks he's talking to some psychological part of himself and is unconscious," because that's how we were doing it with him, right? But you and I know that he's wrong. He's actually talking to God, but he doesn't want to admit it. She's like, uh-huh. And I said, "Okay, now you," turn to the husband. I said, she believes she's talking to God. You and I know she's wrong. You and I know she's actually talking to some part of her unconscious, right? It's some feature of her right brain giving her these answers. And he's like, I was like, yeah, good. So both of you stick to your guns. You know you're right. You know the other one's wrong. And we're cool. And they're laughing because I'm saying it right in front of both of them. But that's the way to deal with it, Mel, right? The purpose statements are accurate. You know how I know they're accurate? Because people still, after thousands of years, have a reaction to them. I can test those purpose statements, and they will test as accurate. We have in the true purpose methodology, we have a whole bunch of ways of testing purpose statements. Now, we've created other purpose statements for Israel, but those ones are perfectly fine. They work just great, right? And part of how I know how well they work is how uncomfortable they make some folks, right? The religious ones are like, "Oh my God, they're great," and the other ones are like, right? That's absolutely a sign of accuracy for these purpose statements. Now, did they come from God? Well, if you believe in God, yes. And if you don't believe in God, no. If you don't believe in God, then the answer is that the prophets correctly got these purpose statements and mistakenly thought they got them from God, just like the husband, right? That's fine. It's the same thing as like Rev Cook talking about Israel being a holy nation. And his point of view is, okay, the leaders who created it were not believers and deliberately created a secular nation. They just didn't know they were doing God's work, right? It's exactly the same thing in reverse. So it just depends on whether you believe in God or not. Either it was God and it's exactly the way it looks, or it wasn't, and the people who got the correct purpose statements did so in a way other than what they thought.
Okay, so that's incredible, because we've never had this discussion. This part of the discussion is brand new. And you never asked me, but most of me doesn't believe in God. I have part of my...
I'm not shocked by that, Mel.
One of my hippocampuses, or hippocampus, or
hippocampi,
is a believer. And this makes a lot of sense to me, because I think that if there's anything that makes us special, it's the Bible.
Yeah.
And what I tell my students, and sometimes I get castigated for this, is I say, there's no way of knowing who wrote the Bible. There's no way of knowing who wrote the book of Genesis.
Yeah, it's not signed by the author.
So let's say it's God. Well, if it's God, that's cool.
Well, let me say this, with potentially very tiny exceptions, it was almost certainly all written down by people, most likely Jewish men.
That's fine.
They may have been inspired by God while doing so, assuming God exists.
The teaching is the Pentateuch.
Pentateuch. Yeah.
You forced me to use a lot of words that are hard to pronounce today.
Yeah, and that's okay. The books of Moses, the Torah, yeah.
Al pi Adonai biyad Moshe, from the mouth of God with the hand of Moses.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm getting goosebumps. But what I tell my students is that if God, caused Moses or other people, the 4 people who wrote the Bible or whoever, that's cool. But
wouldn't that be neat?
No, let me tell you what's really neat. If people wrote it.
Yeah.
If people wrote it, it's incredible. It's like this, the book. The stories, the laws, the sacrifice of Isaac, King David. You can't buy these stories for love or money. So we have the stories. So if you ask me, after 51 years in Israel, and I came here when I was 17, yes, I feel that I'm part of something that isn't working properly. If you ask me.
Yeah.
I don't know what my purpose is, but I came 51 years ago to make this a better country. And in many ways, it's not.
Yeah, I tried too, Mel, and I can point to maybe one thing I did that made stuff better, but most of it just didn't work.
Yeah,
it's hard work. Making Israel better is hard work.
I've been in academia for 40 years and banging my head, and I keep telling them what I think has to be the future of colleges and universities, and they keep firing me for that. And every time I say something, it eventually happens. But anyway,
a little bit of Jeremiah there, right?
Yeah. So let's talk. Absolutely. So let's talk now about the Beatles.
Okay.
Are the Beatles part of your belief system?
I believe in the Beatles. I believe, if we're talking about the band, I do believe they exist or existed. Right. And as evidence, I've listened to a great deal of their music. So that's where I draw on my belief from, is the existence of their music.
Because people I know have created a whole religion based on the Beatles songs.
Oh, really? Interesting. And what is this religion called? Is this Beatlesism or something, or Beatlology? What's it called?
Marinados. I will send you the book of the Marinados.
Okay. I was unaware that the Beatles had formed their own religion.
No, they didn't form it. I formed
Well,
it.
inadvertently, I know. I mean, you know, you got to feel bad for like the Beatles or Haile Selassie, who all of the, you know, Rastas worship as the second coming of Christ, some hapless dude.
Glass is part of it because the holy color of the Beatles is yellow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So he's inadvertently a part of this, you know.
All right. I'm learning. This is all news to me, Mel.
Well, because this program is about you, not me. But I will send you the book of the religion of the Beatles. But
Thank you.
The Beatles were very cool, right?
Absolutely. Made great music and interesting people.
What is your favorite song?
I like "Let It Be." That's a really good one. A sort of mischievous part of me wants to say, "Why don't we do it in the road?" But that's not actually true.
Through the request or through the value you associate with the song?
Oh, I'm thinking of it of the enjoyment I derive from listening it, right? Listening to it, pleasure. Which songs give me pleasure?
1963, the Beatles were singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand,"
Mm-hmm.
and in 1967, 68, they're singing "Why Don't We Do It in the Road? Nobody will be watching us."
Right. Yeah.
They went.
So, you know, that went from hand holding to foreplay to, you know, it's a normal progression.
They found their purpose. So I think that the Beatles had a purpose. So "Let It Be" is going to be your favorite.
Sure, we'll go with that.
Okay, and before we sign off, and I thank you profusely for a wonderful discussion, I'm going to ask you to sing a few bars.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be. Apologize for not warming my voice up first. It would have been better, but give myself a B-.
Whenever you're speaking, you should always do a few warm-ups, not just.
That's a good idea, Mel.
When I have an important talk, I always practice sirening and.
Yeah, I'm more likely to do that before going on stage, but this is our stage now in COVID days. So. Yeah.
So last question before I say.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is Zoom gloom or is Zoom boom?
I'm not sure. I personally am very grateful for Zoom. I think I haven't tracked it closely, but I imagine they've done quite well for themselves in COVID. And I think they deserve the profits they've gotten. They have bailed us out. A few years ago, video technology was not this good nor this available to the average person. And there are schools and children and all sorts of situations where without it, things would be way, way worse than they are. Now, I say that in full acknowledgement of the digital divide and that the vast majority of humanity does not have access to several megabits per second and cannot do video conferencing. But for those who do, I think Zoom is incredible and we should all be very grateful.
And I agree. And one of the things that it has done is enabled me to create this wonderful show where I get to interview incredible people. So, Tim Kelley, is there anything I haven't asked you?
There are many things you haven't asked me, Mel, but nothing we need to cover today.
Because it's after my bedtime. I mean, here like early morning for you in Los Angeles, but here in Tel Aviv, you know, past my bedtime.
Yep. No, I think you've been quite thorough and taken me in directions I have not talked about but wanted to, and directions I had not thought that we would go.
Well, you're an incredible man, and I salute you. And until I raise my $10,000 for my travels to Mel's subconscious, I'll probably be unconscious before I'll be something.
Stay purposeful, Mel. You're a purposeful dude. Stay on the path, and you'll be a voice shouting in the wilderness until one of those schools decides they really want to be a school of the future, and then you'll be a hot commodity. So, Inshallah.
My friend, God bless you.
God bless you, if he exists.
And the world. You're an incredible jewel.
Thank you.
Bye, my friend.
Thank you, Mel.
Thank you, Tim. Bye. You see, I can't even end this conversation. Things keep popping.
It's too much fun. Can't turn it off.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget to share it.
Okay.